The birth of a modern colossus did not happen overnight, nor was it the result of a simple architectural decision. It was the materialization of a vision that had been growing for decades in the mind of one man who refused to think small. In the early 2000s, as the National Football League entered a new era of media expansion, global audiences, and billion-dollar franchises, Jerry Jones, the billionaire owner of the Dallas Cowboys, believed that the team needed more than a stadium. It needed a monument. It needed a structure capable of representing power, innovation, and dominance, not only in Texas, but in the entire world of sports. That vision would soon take physical form in the city of Arlington, Texas, forever changing its skyline and its economic future. Construction on what would later become known as AT&T Stadium began in 2006, on a vast stretch of land strategically positioned between Dallas and Fort Worth. At the time, Arlington was already familiar with large-scale attractions, housing venues like Six Flags Over Texas and the Texas Rangers ballpark, but nothing could compare to what was about to rise from the ground. Jerry Jones personally led the project with an almost obsessive attention to detail. His goal was clear and unapologetic: to build the most technologically advanced, visually imposing, and symbolically powerful stadium in the history of the NFL. Locals would soon nickname it Jerry World, a title that perfectly captured both the scale of the structure and the personality behind it. The investment was staggering. Estimates placed the total cost at around $1.3 billion, making it one of the most expensive sports venues ever constructed at the time. Public funding, private investment, and complex financial arrangements came together to support the project, and while critics initially questioned the risk, the city of Arlington placed its bet on the promise of long-term transformation. Jerry Jones, already known for his bold business moves since purchasing the Dallas Cowboys in 1989, saw the stadium as more than a home field. He envisioned a global destination, a place where sports, entertainment, and spectacle would merge into a single, unforgettable experience. As the steel framework rose and the massive retractable roof took shape, it became clear that AT&T Stadium was not following conventional design logic. The structure stretched over 3 million square feet, with towering arches that would become instantly recognizable across the world. Inside, the seating capacity exceeded 80,000 spectators, with the ability to expand beyond 100,000 for major events, placing it among the largest stadiums on the planet. Every detail was designed to overwhelm the senses, from the premium luxury suites to the vast open concourses that allowed fans to feel part of something monumental. One of the most iconic features, and perhaps the most talked about even before the stadium opened, was the colossal center-hung video board. When unveiled, it was the largest high-definition screen in the world, stretching nearly from one 20-yard line to the other. Suspended above the field like a technological marvel, the screen redefined how fans experienced live sports. Replays, graphics, and cinematic visuals transformed each game into a spectacle that blurred the line between stadium and broadcast studio. For Jerry Jones, this was not excess. It was necessity. He believed the future of sports entertainment depended on immersion, and AT&T Stadium would lead the way. The official inauguration took place on May 27, 2009, marking the culmination of 3 years of relentless construction and planning. The opening was not just a ceremonial ribbon-cutting, but a statement to the world. Arlington, once considered a supporting city between two major urban centers, suddenly found itself at the heart of global attention. The economic impact was immediate. Hotels, restaurants, and local businesses experienced a surge in activity, and the stadium quickly became one of the city's largest economic engines. Tourism increased, employment opportunities expanded, and Arlington's identity was forever tied to this architectural giant. It did not take long for AT&T Stadium to prove its value on the world stage. In February 2011, it hosted Super Bowl XLV, an event watched by millions across the globe. Despite challenges caused by rare winter weather in Texas, the game cemented the stadium's reputation as a premier venue capable of handling the biggest moments in sports. Beyond football, the stadium became a versatile stage for college championships, International soccer matches, boxing megafights, concerts by global music icons, and even large-scale cultural and religious gatherings. Each event reinforced the idea that this was not merely a football stadium, but a modern arena for history-making moments. The atmosphere of grandeur surrounding AT&T Stadium was impossible to ignore. Walking into the venue felt less like entering a sports facility and more like stepping into a cathedral of modern entertainment. The scale inspired awe, the technology demanded attention, and the ambition behind every design choice was unmistakable. Jerry Jones had succeeded in building a structure that reflected his philosophy. Think bigger than anyone else dares, and the world will have no choice but to look. Yet beneath the polished steel, glowing screens, and roaring crowds, this overwhelming sense of greatness also created a powerful contrast. A place designed to symbolize triumph, innovation, and celebration would later become the backdrop for moments that tested expectations, challenged narratives, and left lasting impressions on players and fans alike. The sheer magnitude of AT&T Stadium amplified every victory and every defeat, turning ordinary games into unforgettable chapters of sports history. What was built as a dream of dominance would soon host stories that went far beyond architecture, revealing that even the most magnificent stages can witness outcomes no one anticipates. The day the spectacle turned into tension began like so many others inside AT&T Stadium, wrapped in excitement, expectation, and the unmistakable feeling that history was about to unfold. It was February 6, 2011, and the world's eyes were fixed on Arlington, Texas. Super Bowl XLV had arrived. The Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, two of the most storied franchises in NFL history, were set to face each other on the grandest stage the league could offer. More than 100,000 people were expected inside the stadium, while millions more watched from around the globe. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation, pride, and the promise of an unforgettable night. From the outside, AT&T Stadium stood like a modern fortress, its massive arches cutting through the Texas sky. Inside, the enormous central video board glowed, the crowd roared, and every detail reflected the ambition of Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, who had pushed relentlessly to bring the Super Bowl to his stadium. Commentators spoke of innovation, of scale, of how this venue represented the future of the NFL. For the fans filling the seats hours before kickoff, it felt like they were stepping into a celebration not just of football, but of everything the league had become. Yet beneath the spectacle, something was already going wrong. In the hours leading up to kickoff, as fans continued to pour into the stadium, workers were racing against time to complete the installation of temporary seating areas. These additional sections had been approved to accommodate the enormous demand, pushing the stadium's capacity well beyond its standard configuration. The pressure to meet expectations was intense. Super Bowl Sunday is unforgiving. There is no room for delays, no margin for error, and no patience for excuses. Still, the work continued as the clock ticked down. Then, in a moment that would forever stain an otherwise historic night, the unthinkable happened. A section of temporary seating failed. Without warning, part of the structure gave way, sending debris crashing down and injuring several fans. The incident occurred before kickoff, but its impact rippled instantly through the stadium. What had been a place of celebration turned in a matter of seconds into a scene of confusion and alarm. Emergency personnel rushed in. Stadium staff scrambled to secure the area. Fans nearby stood frozen, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The noise of excitement faded into uneasy murmurs, then into a heavy silence broken only by urgent voices over radios. News of the incident spread rapidly. Word reached the broadcast teams, the league officials, and the coaching staffs preparing for the biggest game of their lives. On the field, players from both teams were still warming up, unaware at first of the seriousness of what had happened in the stands. Soon, however, the tension became impossible to ignore. Coaches like Mike McCarthy of the Green Bay Packers and Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers were informed. Referees conferred with NFL officials. Security tightened. The rhythm of the day was disrupted. For the fans who had traveled from across the country, some spending years dreaming of attending a Super Bowl, the shock was deeply emotional. Some were told they would not have seats at all. Others watched as injured spectators were escorted away. Confusion turned into frustration, and frustration into disbelief. This was not how the biggest event in American sports was supposed to unfold. On live television, broadcasters struggled to balance celebration with responsibility. Cameras avoided the affected area, while commentators carefully chose their words. The NFL, known for its meticulous planning and image control, found itself facing an uncomfortable reality in real time. The stadium that symbolized progress and perfection had, for a moment, become a reminder of human error and vulnerability. AT&T Stadium, the crown jewel of modern sports architecture, was no longer just a backdrop for glory. It was now a witness to one of the league's most unsettling pregame moments. As kickoff approached, a difficult decision was made. The game would go on. When the Packers and Steelers finally took the field, the roar of the crowd returned. But it was different. Beneath the cheers lingered a sense of unease. Players collided, passes were thrown, touchdowns were scored, yet the earlier incident hung invisibly over the stadium. Every cheer carried a shadow. Every celebration was tempered by the knowledge that something had gone wrong on a day meant to be flawless. For the athletes, the emotional impact was complex. Super Bowl appearances are rare, sometimes once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. To step onto the field, knowing fans had been injured in the very building designed to showcase the sport, added an unexpected weight. The referees, tasked with maintaining order on the field, did so under extraordinary circumstances. League officials worked behind the scenes throughout the game, managing logistics, responding to media inquiries, and preparing statements that would be scrutinized worldwide. When the final whistle blew and the Green Bay Packers emerged victorious, lifting the Lombardi Trophy under the bright lights of AT&T Stadium, history was made. Yet alongside the triumph, another story had already been written. One that spoke not of touchdowns and championships, but of tension, vulnerability, and the fragile line between spectacle and crisis. In the days that followed, investigations were launched. The NFL faced criticism. Lawsuits were filed. Jerry Jones publicly addressed the incident, expressing regret and emphasizing the league's commitment to safety. Arlington, which had basked in global attention, now found itself associated with controversy as well. The stadium remained an architectural marvel, but its image was forever more complex. That day marked a turning point. It reminded fans, players, and league executives alike that even the most advanced venues are not immune to failure. It showed how quickly celebration can turn into silence, how a moment of oversight can overshadow years of planning. AT&T Stadium would go on to host countless unforgettable events, but February 6, 2011 would always stand apart. It was the day the spectacle gave way to tension. The day a symbol of modern glory became a silent witness to one of the NFL's most sobering moments. In the hours that followed the incident at AT&T Stadium, a strange and uncomfortable silence settled over Arlington, Texas. The game had ended, the Lombardi Trophy had been lifted, confetti had fallen, and yet the celebration felt incomplete. Behind the scenes, the NFL was already dealing with the weight of what had happened earlier that day on February 6, 2011. What the public saw on television was only part of the story. Away from the cameras, a complex chain of reactions, decisions, and emotional consequences began to unfold, revealing a side of professional football that is rarely visible to fans. Almost immediately after the Super Bowl concluded, league officials gathered in private meetings. Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL at the time, was placed at the center of the response. Known for his firm leadership and emphasis on the league's image, Goodell faced intense pressure. The Super Bowl is not just a sporting event, it is the NFL's most valuable global showcase. Any failure, especially one involving fan safety, threatened the credibility the league had spent decades building. Within hours, official statements were drafted, carefully worded to express concern while avoiding premature conclusions. The NFL publicly acknowledged that fans had been injured due to the collapse of temporary seating and promised a full investigation. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys and the driving force behind AT&T Stadium, also moved quickly into damage control mode. For Jones, this was deeply personal. The stadium was his dream, his legacy, and his boldest statement to the sports world. In interviews given in the days following the Super Bowl, Jones appeared visibly shaken. He expressed regret, apologized to the affected fans, and emphasized that safety had always been a priority. Still, his words carried the weight of disappointment. The stadium that was meant to symbolize perfection and innovation was now under scrutiny, and so was his leadership. Behind closed doors, investigations began almost immediately. Engineers, construction experts, and safety officials examined the temporary seating structures, reviewing design plans, installation procedures, and last-minute modifications. The question was no longer just what happened, but how it was allowed to happen on the most important day of the NFL calendar. Reports would later reveal that the rush to add extra seats, driven by overwhelming ticket demand, played a critical role. The pressure to maximize capacity and revenue had collided with the unforgiving reality of time constraints. For the players themselves, the emotional impact lingered longer than many expected. Members of both the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers spoke privately about the strange energy that followed the incident. Some players later admitted that learning fans had been injured inside the stadium affected their focus, even as they tried to compartmentalize and prepare for the biggest game of their careers. Coaches like Mike McCarthy and Mike Tomlin had the difficult task of keeping their teams mentally locked in, while also processing the seriousness of the situation unfolding around them. Sports journalists who were present that day began to share their own accounts in the days and weeks that followed. Writers from major outlets such as ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and national newspapers described a noticeable shift in tone inside the stadium. What began as excitement slowly transformed into unease. Several reporters recalled conversations with fans who were confused, upset, or quietly angry. Some had paid thousands of dollars to attend the Super Bowl, only to find themselves standing without seats or witnessing injured spectators being escorted away. For them, the spectacle had cracked, revealing something deeply unsettling beneath the surface. Former NFL players also joined the conversation. On television panels and radio shows, ex-athletes debated responsibility and accountability. Some defended the league, pointing out the complexity of organizing an event of that scale. Others were more critical, arguing that the NFL's relentless pursuit of growth and profit had created an environment where risks were underestimated. The incident became a flashpoint in a larger discussion about player safety, fan safety, and whether the league's ambition was outpacing its ability to manage consequences. As the final images fade and the echoes of the story linger in your mind, one question remains. How many moments like this are still hidden behind the bright lights of the world's greatest arenas? If you feel that curiosity pulling you deeper, if you want to keep uncovering the darker, shocking, and rarely discussed stories that exist beyond the scoreboards and trophies, this is your invitation. Join this channel and become part of a community that looks past the surface of sports history, where legends are questioned and untold truths come to light. Subscribe now, turn on notifications so you never miss a new story, and leave your like to support this journey. Here, we don't stop at the game itself. We go further, into the shadows, revealing what truly happened behind the scenes of moments that shaped the world of sports forever. Among the fans who were inside AT&T Stadium that day, the memory lingered long after the final score faded. Many described a sense of disbelief that never fully went away. For some, attending the Super Bowl had been a lifelong dream, saved for and planned years in advance. To have that dream overshadowed by fear and uncertainty left a lasting emotional mark. Online forums, social media platforms, and call-in sports radio shows filled with first-hand stories. Each account added another layer to the growing realization that February 6, 2011, would not be remembered for football alone. As the media cycle continued, lawsuits were filed by injured fans, drawing even more attention to the incident. Legal proceedings forced additional details into the public eye, including internal communications and safety assessments. AT&T Stadium, once celebrated purely as an entertainment marvel, now carried a symbolic weight. It represented both the heights of modern sports architecture and the consequences of pushing boundaries too far, too fast. Over time, the NFL worked to reinforce safety protocols, particularly regarding temporary structures and large-scale events. While the league never publicly framed these changes as direct admissions of fault, the adjustments spoke for themselves. The Super Bowl seating incident became a reference point in internal planning discussions, a reminder of how quickly a triumph can turn into a crisis. Years later, when fans walk into AT&T Stadium for a Cowboys game, a concert, or another major event, few openly talk about that day. Yet, the memory remains embedded in the building's history. Journalists still reference it. Executives still remember it. And those who were there will never forget the moment when celebration gave way to concern. What the public did not see in real time was the emotional reckoning behind the scenes. The quiet meetings, the careful statements, the private doubts, and the long nights spent reassessing decisions. That Super Bowl weekend reshaped conversations within the NFL, reminding everyone involved that greatness comes with responsibility, and that even the most powerful institutions are vulnerable to moments they cannot fully control. AT&T Stadium would continue to host unforgettable moments, roaring crowds, and historic performances. But from that point forward, it was no longer just a symbol of entertainment. It became a silent witness to the day when the NFL was forced to confront its own limits in full view of the world. The passage of time did not erase what happened at AT&T Stadium on February 6, 2011. Instead, it transformed that moment into a reference point, a quiet but powerful reminder that still echoes through the corridors of the NFL. What initially seemed like an isolated incident tied to a single Super Bowl gradually became something far more significant. It evolved into a lesson etched into the collective memory of the league, reshaping conversations about safety, responsibility, and the hidden costs of spectacle in modern American football. In the years that followed Super Bowl XLV, the incident began to surface whenever discussions turned to fan safety, operational pressure, and the emotional and physical limits of the sport. Executives, engineers, and league officials could no longer speak about innovation and expansion without acknowledging risk. The NFL, an organization built on precision and control, had been publicly reminded that even its grandest productions were vulnerable. That realization quietly influenced decisions at the highest levels of the league. Roger Goodell, who remained commissioner in the years after the event, often spoke about accountability and learning from past experiences. While he rarely referenced that Super Bowl directly in public forums, insiders and journalists understood its influence. Internal protocols were revisited. The approval process for temporary seating and large-scale stadium modifications became more rigid. Independent inspections gained more authority, and timelines for last-minute structural changes were scrutinized with far greater caution. The league could no longer afford another moment where ambition outpaced preparation. The legacy of that day also extended into broader conversations about physical and emotional pressure within football itself. Around the same period, the NFL was already facing growing scrutiny over player injuries, concussions, and long-term health consequences. The Super Bowl incident added another layer to that debate. It was no longer just about what happened between the sidelines, but about the environment surrounding the game. The realization that fans, not just players, could be placed at risk reinforced the idea that safety had to be comprehensive, extending to every individual inside a stadium. Medical protocols continued to evolve in the years that followed. While the changes were driven largely by concerns over head injuries and player welfare, the mindset behind them reflected a broader cultural shift. The league began emphasizing preparation for emergencies, rapid response coordination, and psychological support for those affected by traumatic events. Players, coaches, and staff increasingly acknowledged that moments of crisis, even those not directly tied to gameplay, could leave lasting emotional scars. AT&T Stadium itself did not fade into controversy. On the contrary, it continued to host some of the most significant events in sports and entertainment. It welcomed Super Bowls, college football championships, major boxing matches, global soccer games, and sold-out concerts featuring the world's biggest artists. Each event reinforced its status as one of the most important venues in the NFL and beyond. The massive video board still glowed. The retractable roof still opened to Texas skies. The crowd still roared. But the meaning of the stadium had changed. For those who knew its history, AT&T Stadium was no longer just a symbol of grandeur and technological achievement. It had become a place layered with memory. Beneath the polished floors and towering steel arches lived a story that complicated its identity. It stood as proof that modern sports arenas are not immune to human error, and that the pursuit of perfection can sometimes mask fragility. Journalists often revisit that Super Bowl when analyzing how the NFL manages pressure. They point to Arlington as a turning point, a moment when the league was forced to confront the consequences of scale. Former players and executives have described it as a quiet wake-up call, one that did not result in sweeping public apologies, but instead led to subtle, lasting changes behind the scenes. In that sense, its impact was profound, precisely because it reshaped behavior rather than headlines. Fans, too, carry the memory forward. For some, AT&T Stadium remains a place of awe and excitement. For others, especially those who were present that day or followed the story closely, it represents a cautionary tale. It reminds them that sports, no matter how thrilling, exist within the real world, governed by human decisions and human limitations. Today, when conversations arise about the fine line between entertainment and tragedy in professional sports, the story of that Super Bowl inevitably resurfaces. It is mentioned alongside debates about player safety, mental health, and the relentless demands placed on athletes and organizations alike. It serves as a reminder that the NFL's greatest strength, its ability to create massive, unforgettable spectacles, can also be its greatest vulnerability. AT&T Stadium still stands tall in Arlington, Texas, a landmark visible from miles away. It continues to represent success, ambition, and innovation. Yet woven into its legacy is a quieter truth. It is a monument not only to victory and celebration, but also to responsibility and reflection. It symbolizes the moment when the NFL was forced to look beyond the scoreboard and confront the human cost of pushing boundaries. That is the stadium's shadowed legacy. Not one defined by failure alone, but by transformation. A reminder that the game, for all its power and passion, must always reckon with the consequences of its own greatness. And in that reckoning, AT&T Stadium became more than a stage for football. It became a lasting symbol of how quickly glory can brush against tragedy, leaving a permanent mark on the history of the NFL. If you want to keep uncovering the darkest, most shocking, and least talked about stories hidden behind the greatest stages of world sports, this is your place. Subscribe to the channel now and become part of a community that looks beyond the highlights, beyond the trophies, and beyond the final score. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story, and leave your like to support this work and help these stories reach more people. Here, we don't just talk about games, victories, or legends. We dive deep into what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling, into the moments history tried to forget, and into the truths that changed sports forever. Stay with us, because every stadium has a shadow, and every legend has a side that deserves to be told.